All right, if you listen, here's the noise that I heard when the one-way bearing went out. Turned on, hit the button. You're just hearing a spin, but nothing engaging. Aha! Huh. Blew two one-way bearings. It actually spins the wrong way. All right, but before we hop into everything, I do want to cut to a montage of the final product, what it looks like, and then we'll get into all the final tuning surprises that I went through. Because, yeah, I missed a few things. I rushed a few things. We got there, but took longer than it should have. Guys, there she be. Took a little extra tuning and then I anticipated. Really had a hard time getting the carb to idle in right, fuel leaking out of the carb, so had to get that straightened out. But wow, that was a whole lot of little detail. And the final detail on here was salvaging the rack off the burned out quad. These racks here for these early models have this cutout in here because the shifter is up here on the fairing versus down on the motor. These are hard to come by. I was looking for these around on eBay and I was seeing $200 and $300 and very few available. So this one had been welded all over the place, and this is some of the remnants there. The fella before had welded in some tabs for some LEDs, this great big bar, and then these big hooks ultimately were connected to the front bumper. So I pulled it apart, cleaned it up, and there's still a lot of extra heavy steel on here, but this is solid. We'll be using this for pulling. I was not able to salvage the skid plates. So the skid plates are really kind of a three-piece thing here. Let's see. This one here up front, if you could picture this, went like this, and from the front of the quad this was fastened into that front bumper, on back. I had to cut it. It's smoked. And then the rear, this part here, they go something like that, front to back. Really just beat up, but this piece here would protect your front differential, and then back protecting your drive shaft. Oil cut out here, and then on back it's just yeah, I couldn't reuse these. One more quick flash. I thought you might be interested to see everything I cut off of the old bumper. There it is. That's some heavy duty steel there. That is thick as my thumb, and it weighs a lot, and I had to cut it off. Or we lose the light so fast out here this time of year. Everything's hanging so low in the sky, and ordinarily I try not to work outside, but we have something we have to work through. So got it up and running, and I was pulling campfire wood out of the woods, ran it for about a half a day, and then it wouldn't start. And what happened is you'd go and you'd hit the starter button. So you'd hit the starter button and you can hear things spinning. You can hear the starter spinning, so you know it's not a blown starter, but the motor isn't cranking. Now, while I was out and about pulling my little trailer and grabbing wood, I had noticed the shifting was really difficult. I'd reach down, even try with my hand trying to get, and just didn't want to let go. And you could get the idle down, but still didn't want to let go. So I'm thinking maybe the clutch fibers are sticking. The other thing is when I'm cranking it, it's cranking pretty slow, which is a little unusual. And it would also hear a bang sometimes. And unfortunately, I didn't catch any of this on camera, but when you're cranking and it doesn't catch, take your finger off. It's like when the motor spins down, you just hear like a metal bang inside. So started digging in to understand what was going on, and the one-way bearing had gone. So I'll show you what that looks like in practice here. Here is a spare centrifugal clutch basket because we had a parts motor. Behind this big washer is a one-way bearing, and this bearing will spin or allow this whole piece to spin in one direction but not the other. The idea behind this is a starter clutch, so when you press that starter button, everything spins. The one-way bearing, these guys here, this is the blown out one, pieces have come out. These guys spin out with centrifugal force, and they grab both sides here, the inner and the outer part, so that we get centrifugal force, spins the shoes, and as the shoes go out, they grab, we spin this whole mechanism. That turns the motor over until the motor starts. And when the motor starts, you let go of the button, the shoes retract, and everything spins, and you no longer have that grip. Well, oh, it's nasty. This is also what I found in there. So looking at that, these shoes absolutely just destroyed. There's no groove left in there. Parts are flaking out. I mean, that's something special. So I had a few pieces that we need. One, we needed a replacement one-way bearing, and I didn't reuse the one that I had here from the parts motor. And I'll show you on the blown up one. Maybe a little tough to capture on camera, but there are flat spots. This is the blown up one. Flat spots, real big flat spots all around this guy. And maybe you can probably see them right on there. This one is also getting some flat spots. So got a new one-way bearing. Then started looking for a new shoe pack, and I was unable to find this 4-lobe shoe pack. I mean, I can get it OEM for $500. Didn't want to do that. I get some used ones, but the used ones are also pretty worn down. I tried to see if I might be able to swap in a 5-lobe pack from a Big Bear 400, but near as I can tell, I didn't actually order. I think the size is going to be too small, and I would have to swap out the drum here as well, and probably a different one-way bearing, so a few other pieces. So I had this one from the parts motor, but it was very smooth, and there needs to be a little bit of channel in here for the oil. So what I ended up doing, I took my air grinder, and with the lightest touch that I could muster, I cut these grooves in. And that was with this guy. So with a little bit of air, put a mask on, safety glasses, and just really quick, really light, float it over. So with that, I am going to try and run this clutch pack, and you can see my lines aren't perfectly smooth there. So let me grab a pair of gloves and slip the clutch cover off here, and let's see about getting this all put back together, and let's see where we go. All right, so to do this, I did have to take the foot peg off so I could get the brake far enough out of the way to pull out the 8mm bolts down below here, walk around the outside. I undid this Phillips here just to get a little room on this speedo cable, or in this case, it's an odometer cable on this one. You will have to take out your oil plunger. Let's not lose our rubber washer there. And disconnect your oil line up top. At that point, the cover will come off. And then pay attention down here because this is all your shifting linkage and this tends to want to fall apart. Which it did. So describing this, you're going to have a washer, a needle bearing, yep, hiding on the back there, a needle bearing, another washer, and then if you're able to see here, if I get my fingers out of the way, mesh the gearing. There we go. And you see it'll fit. There's a tooth, extra tooth. So there's a right way to do it. I had it a moment ago, one off. There we go. Down in here. There we go. Finally, and there's a spring on the other side. This fella sits onto this post. And it's okay if the little ball bearings are a little off from their detents there. It'll all go together when you push the lid on. This, when you shift, pushes this detent arm back and forth here. So that's what takes the pressure off of the clutch plates when you're shifting. And watch out for this guy. This guy tends to want to fall out as well. So here we go. I have put the new drum on. And notice in here, this is nice and smooth. It's not ridged. If it was ridged, I'd want to take this out. I'd want to hit it, some kind of sandpaper, flapper disc, something to smooth it out. You don't want those ridges. This one's nice and flat because, well, the shoes that came out were nice and flat. I've put the new one-way bearing in. Now, let's see, notice, here I am spinning. No grab. If I try to go the other way, boom. So we put the shoes on and we hit the starter button, the shoes grab, and you'll start spinning the motor. And this will start the motor. And I just got easy because I want to pass that compression stroke. And then when you take off, everything can just keep on spinning. So, let's put this back together. I need that big washer on here, and then we'll start stacking the clutch pack or the shoe pack back in. I want to take another moment here and point out something else. It's a mistake I made here. Difficult to figure out from the manual. Difficult. I just missed it. I have the one-way bearing in here backwards, so it's catching counterclockwise, spinning clockwise. This is reverse. Behind here, my one-way bearing is flipped the wrong way. So I wanted to point that out because the symptom is when I am trying to come down to idle, it doesn't disengage. It keeps trying to lurch forward and stalls out the motor because it catches on the one-way bearing. It doesn't allow the shoes to slip. So that's the symptom there. Everything's fine and neutral, but if you're in first, second, third, whatever, and you come down to idle RPM, it just kind of just keeps trying to go, puts the strain on the motor, stalls out. One-way bearing is backwards. This should free spin counterclockwise, not the way it's going right now. This is backwards. So pull this out. This guy right here, no markings, no arrows, no anything on here, but this has got to come out, be flipped around. There we go, flipped it around. There is that big washer that goes back over here. Now we're spinning counterclockwise. We engage the motor this way. There we go. That should fix, oh, that should fix something I've been chasing for a week until it finally dawned on me. Could that be backwards? Don't make that mistake. Make sure your basket spins counterclockwise, engages clockwise. Something else I should call out, just in case, because this is already on here. There is a washer that goes behind. To pull this off, notice this detent. You're gonna want to line that up. We'll spin the nice easy way. Oh, and I went past it. There we go. At this point, and it's gonna fight a little bit here, but it'll come off. But what I wanted to see, there's a washer down there, and I wanted to make sure that washer was there. Didn't want to lose that. So we're good. We're ready to reassemble. Here we go. We've got our big washer. And you know what I think I can do, make it easier? I'm just gonna set it. There's a nice groove on the back of the pack here. Here's what I'm doing here. I have some waterproof grease. Not something I would ordinarily do, but I'm touching a little bit of it here to make this just sticky enough for assembly. With that sitting on, we have the locking washer. This one's from the spare motor, has both of its lobes, so we're in pretty good shape to use this guy. Set them in there. And this one here, oh, let me measure this. I think this is gonna be a 29 millimeter. I have a 30 impact that I've been using. Oh, survey says 29. It would be a 29. I've got a 30. It doesn't have to be super tight because you're gonna lock it with these ears. There we go. We are done in here. Looking at my gasket, I'm gonna go ahead, we're gonna reuse this gasket. That all looks fine. So with our assembly put together down here that I had already showed earlier, we're gonna slip this back on. I've already got a crush washer on the top. So I'll get my other crush washer on the bottom. 12 mil. I'm going to start feeding all of my case bolts in. They already have anti-seize on them from before. And just for the frame of reference of it, this old Ryobi has very little impact. It's good enough to spin everything in and really good enough not to strip anything out, but those are absolutely not torqued down enough to not have a leak out the bottom. So I'm going to go back around them by hand and get them torqued down. All right, if you listen, here's the noise that I heard when the one-way bearing went out. Turned on, hit the button. You're just hearing a spin, but nothing engaging. Again. All right, so the saga continued a little bit here. So I'm on the other side of the motor. Popped out the starter gear, and I was looking for flat spots in it. No flat spots. So what happens is I hit the button, starter spins, but it is barely catching and turning the rest of the mechanism. So the rest of the mechanism, slip this back in here. There we go. starter gear takes the power, turns this gear here. This smaller gear meshes with this gear, big one in my hand here, turns the whole stator, which has a key attached to this wheel, which spins, and that centrifugal force on the other side opens up the shoes, which grab and turn the motor over. And then we stop and the motor takes over, except it doesn't happen. And right now, you're looking closely, I'm spinning everything, but these teeth are barely meshing. Barely meshing. So I'm going to go pull that starter out from the other side. I think that the gear on the end of the starter is so worn that it's spinning. So the good news is, well, I did find and save the one-way bearing, because that was absolutely a problem. And the shoes, so we've got a good clutch on the other side. I think I might just be a starter away from this here. Okay, fortunately the starter takes all of 30 seconds to pull out. 8 mil, slips it out enough so I can get some space and get a 10 mil on to loosen up this nut here. And here's what we're looking at. That gear is worn down to heck. So from the parts motor, here's that same mechanism, and it looks just like the one that's on the quad right now. I don't see anything's worn down on there. At least it doesn't appear to be. Everything looks solid. Starter, these teeth are clearly shark finned out, like really shark finned. From the parts motor, this one is better. It is better, but it is still worn. Still pretty worn. Because what we need to have happen is we need a nice tight mesh there. Alright, I just zipped that other starter in there, the one that had better teeth. And I'm going to hit the starter button real quick because we've drained the oil. We don't want to have problems. Well, I guess we'll be okay because with the flywheel off, we're not going to spin the motor. What we want to see is we want to see this mesh. And you see, looking at it now, it's there, but under load, it looks like a tight mesh, doesn't it? So, on, key on, quick tap. Yeah. That is what we would want to see. So, decision. I'm going to slip the flywheel back on because that'll give it the resistance. And then we'll hit the button again and we'll see if it starts to slip. Aha! Spinning behind the flywheel. Something I have never seen before. This gear is spinning independently of the flywheel. Watch this. It takes some doing. Look at that. let's look at the parts motor. From the parts motor, look at that. Another one-way bearing. Yamaha, this. Sit down in there. Now again, when I look at this one-way bearing, I have flat spots. Yeah, I got a lot of flat spots. We're going to get a replacement there. Yeah, I got discoloration on the metal here too from the heat. You can see behind there. Holy smokes. So from the parts motor, here we go. Spins one way, not the other way. Should spin this way. It actually spins the wrong way. And the starter has enough that's able to spin it the wrong way against those bearings. And that's why we're not cranking. So recognizing that, take out the real bad, fished out, shark finned out starter, the seized up flywheel and gear. Dying to get that open, see what's on the back. We're gonna put this guy in, see if we can start. All right, back to cranking and rough starting. So figured that out. Yeah, so blew two one-way bearings. That I wasn't expecting. So bad shoes, fix that. Blown up one-way bearing behind the starter clutch. We put a new one-way bearing in there. Found the other one-way bearing behind the flywheel was completely seized up and allowing it to spin the wrong way. When the starter put, you know, we got electricity to the starter. So we're going to get another one-way bearing for that. I mean, it's got some flat spots. It's spinning fine as you see now, but I don't like it. So we're going to get another one for that. And then I'm back to figuring out why it's a hard start. So it's tough to start and it's tough to idle. So we're going to fool around with some pilot jets, things like that. But we made some ground back here. So, all right. All right, you are no doubt wondering what happened. Why is the top end off? Well, I think the reality is I cut some corners here. Yeah. So I put that top end with that Wiseco piston on, just bolted it on because the rig was running, but I didn't really do any checking before doing that. So compression test. Before I ran the motor, I was getting about 100 PSI, which is low. However, I've come to suspect that I was getting 100 PSI because the cylinder was all covered in oil, things like that from assembly that were allowing it to have a little higher PSI. After I started running for a while and I really had all that difficulty with starting and idling and went through tuning the carb, I went back and checked the compression again and I got 75 PSI. So that's just not enough to run. So I think that's the root of the problem there. So slowing down and doing it right, I did a full leak down test. And if you want to see the whole process for leak down test, I did that on a 350 Moto 4, and that's up. I'll put that as a video link above there. So I went and I did that process here. And what I found on a leak down test, I put 100 PSI on with my OTC and air was just leaking out the top side of the cylinder here. A little bit coming out the breather tube. So my assumption at that point, I had no air leakage coming out the valves, either intake or exhaust up top. So I was losing some amount of pressure around the rings and or the head gasket because it was rushing out of the timing chain case here. So clearly losing a lot. I was losing better than 15% on the leak down. And the only reason I say better than 15% is because that's as high as the chart goes, which is basically a failed top end. So somewhere above 15% on my leak down there. So here we are. All set up, have my tools out. I will be testing. I mean, there was nothing leaking around here, and I did do a valve job, so that should be good. I will slow down long enough to put the spark plug back in here and then fill this with WD-40 or like a PB blaster, like a penetration lube, and see how fast and how quickly it gets around the seals here. If it's just leaking right through, I have an issue. But if it's pooling here, I'm good. Again, I didn't hear any leakage coming through either the intake or exhaust on my leak down test, so I don't think there's my issue. I was losing all kinds of pressure up through here. Could be the head gasket, I think the head gasket and the rings. Now looking, this is the piston, and immediately you see where I really cut a corner. Should have looked a little better here. Getting a lot, it's really chopped up the front of this piston. Pretty rough. Wasn't like that when I put it in. These rings are able to compress within the piston. So the piston was sliding against that cylinder wall. And you see just how rich all this carbon buildup from trying to burn this and tune this. The other thing, noticing, see if I can show you here, side by side comparison. See if I can give you a bit of a contrast, but there you go. The Wiseco is a different size piston. Absolutely. Let's see if I can get a measurement. With my cheap calipers, 82.84 millimeter on the new one, and 83.37. So there's an absolute difference there, even with a cheapo measurement. So I'm going to drop in a niche cylinder here. It's not the same as OEM, but it should get me back in the game. I've used the niche on other Moto 4s that I've built. So far they've held up fine. And right out of the box, casting looks good. Surfaces look clean. Nice cross hatching evident down in there. Fits nice. Out of curiosity, yep, Wiseco doesn't even fit down in there. So I don't know if this original was rebored or just worn down and they threw a new piston in. Tell you what, it feels like it could be good with new rings. So I'm going to get set up and just start rocking and rolling here. I'll put you on time lapse for a little bit, and then we'll get the torque and everything down. 29 foot-pounds is what we're going to do on the head bolts. And let's see if from there I can get this tuned in and be done. All right, motor is back together. Everything is torqued down. I just pulled the key off the front fairing so that I can turn this on and we can try our first crank here. There we go, neutral. Now, I don't know, but here we go. This idle screw could be way up because things were just out of whack. choke, gas, craziness. Here we go. All right, let's get it to fire and run for a little bit so we can do another warm compression test and see where we are. Well, dies right out coming off choke, so I might still have something in the carb on the pilot circuit, but let's compression test this. Well, not what I expected there. (65, 70 psi compression test. What? Also explains why it has to run on choke. Have to keep richening it out. Boy, oh boy. Let's retorque a few things. Okay, that's 29 foot-pounds on everything there. All right, fast forward again, and so we put a new cylinder and piston in after doing the leak down test and compression test, and compression was showing 75 psi after a new cylinder and piston. Now the leak down test had all the noise coming out the bottom of the case there, so obviously, to me anyway, a piston and rings, but having done that, torque spec and everything, still 75 psi. So I pulled the top end off because I've done valve adjustments, but I haven't actually looked at the valves themselves, understand do they need a lapping, what do the seats look like. So here it is. Now I've already done a fair amount of cleaning up in here, cleaning up around the gasket space, really just using a wire wheel here to get any gasket residual off. Also cleaning up around the intake, make sure we get this nice and tight when we put the carb boot back on. And looking down in here, and again I've wire wheeled and cleaned up, so let's see, here's the intake, and it may be a little difficult to see, but there is a very narrow band at the edge before you get the discoloration, so it's not a smooth seat all the way in. Same on this one, narrow band. Now looking at the valves themselves, here is the exhaust valve, and there's a little bit of pitting, a lot of discoloration. The hardest thing to see on here is that there is a real lip, quite a lip worn in. Here's what a new valve would look like, and that edge is nice and smooth. And the intake valve, and look at all that pitting on there. This is after I cleaned it up, and again, difficult to see, but if I run my finger down here, there's a big lip worn in. Now, you might be able to just see how it just... So we have new valves. Interestingly, these are the same valves that go on the Moto 4 350. This is the Big Bear 350, so same valve set, so that makes that easy. I'm going to go ahead and get these lapped in, get this put back together. I do have another video doing this whole process, how I do that for the Moto 4 225. Interestingly, same head. I can't tell you if it's the same valves though, but at least it's the same process for disassembly, cleanup, getting it all tuned. So rather than go through that whole process again, I'm just going to get this done so we can get it back on the quad and retest compression and see if we're starting to get where we need to be. I will pause for a moment and show you this setup. As I set the valve in, I popped the end off my hand valve lapping tool. Stuck it on the end of a 7mm here on the drill. Now this is, you got to be careful with this because the drill spins only in one direction. So I go one direction, up and down, lift it so everything can kind of reset. Then I reverse the drill, go back and forth. But I only do this for my first couple of passes to kind of cut in the rough. And then I go back to finishing out manual where I can by hand put the pressure on and spin back and forth. But I thought I'd show this because it kind of helps getting the first couple of cuts down in here. So here we go, forward. Reverse. Oh, slipping around a little bit. Back to forward. Reverse. Boy, that drill sounds like it is just about dead. But now I'll go back to hand spinning to finish this off. This one looks pretty good. The outside band is all now a dull gray, not shiny. So that whole outer band is sitting down in the seat. This one's not going to need a whole lot of touch up to finish up. All right, cutting back over here. While I was in there and we're doing all this work for stiff shifting and poor starting, also wanted to take a look at the clutch fibers and clutch basket. Wasn't sure if the clutch fibers were stuck together, from having sat, without oil. These fibers, they're all fine. They're loose. Nothing here is stuck together. But when you look at this basket, I have never seen a basket as worn as this one. So we had a lot of trouble shifting on the semi-auto, just real stiff letting go. Here's why. Can you see how deep the dimples are on each of the fingers of this basket? Those aren't just a little worn. So here's an example. This one here is smooth. These lobes, these ears, can slip up and down. When you disengage, they can slip up and down. But most of these, really deep. Real deep lobe. Or real deep detents. This one's a great example here. You can probably even go on the side here and you can see how worn it is. So to tackle this, I'm going to simply get a file and I'm going to go through the file and take those edges off on each one, bring them all back down to smooth, and then we're going to continue to run this. Alright, I've got to spend a little bit of time making sure I get all the aluminum shavings off of here, but show you now. Each of these nice and smooth. And the other direction wasn't as bad, reverse. So once I get this cleaned up so I don't have any shavings, this is ready to go back on, and that should really smooth out the clutch. You know, as each of these fiber plates try to disengage, they don't stick in the grooves. When you disengage, they don't go anywhere. Now they should slip right out. All right, I did want to actually cut over to an Excel sheet that I've been keeping together on the cost, so I can talk about the breakdown, the cost of getting the quad, and then all the parts that have gone into it. Kind of give you that total project cost. So let's cut to that. All right, guys, here we go. This is the cost breakdown for the Yamaha Big Bear project. You've been following the series, so here it is. We started off with the purchase. First quad we brought in, that was with the green plastics, $650. And you saw, if you watched the series as we went on, I ended up bringing in a parts quad that caught fire, so another $350 there. So I was in for $1,000 at that point, and had already been troubleshooting through, and ended up having to get a CDI. Had a bad CDI. We had a number of dash lights that were out, and I want to call out here, don't use an LED dash light, particularly for the oil light. For the oil light to come on and ultimately fade out, one of the things it needs is the resistance to a traditional light. If you have an LED light, it's just going to stay on nice and bright and never go out. So learn something there. The dash that the dash lights sit into, the rubber tabs underneath were snapped off, so I ended up getting a used one on eBay just so that could sit properly. And you remember the duct tape seat, no latch hardware. They had gotten rid of that so they could run all the duct tape. So I ended up, fortunately the seat itself was in reasonable condition, had to get the seat latch hardware so we could reuse that. Oil filter, air filter, had spares, reused my own. For the oil change, I did get 5 quarts of Yamaha lube. I tend to like to use that for the wet clutches. Diff oil change, didn't end up changing. It's nice clean oil in there, left it be. The coil, I had a spare, found out the unit on there was bad. It was the same coil. My spare coil came off the Moto 4 350. Same unit, this is just the Big Bear 350. Then we discovered, and we worked through, off the air box, there is a snorkel of sorts that comes off the side of it, and I needed the rubber hose connector, so to say, from that box to that snorkel and the clamp. That's what those are. Oil filter bolts, a couple of those were beat up. They were all rounded off inside, so I replaced those. You remember the fuse. The fuse was wrapped in aluminum foil. So I got new fuses, but also found the fuse holder. I could wiggle the fuse holder and lose connections, so replaced the fuse holder and the fuses. Gasket set, the original motor ended up splitting that down and then found the aluminum chunks down in there. Now, a number of those gaskets I ended up using on the motor from the parts quad is ultimately the motor that ended up in the unit. Key switches, both of them, I mean, the one that caught fire was really kind of mangled, and the one on the green quad had nothing. It was some kind of toggle switch. So I had to get this, and I did have to test these out with an ohm meter to make sure it wasn't a bad switch. I've seen a number of these ignition switches, these knockoffs, are bad or wired backwards right from the factory. Finally, I found I was missing the torsion spring for the seat latch, so I had the seat hardware, had to get the spring so it would actually return, so you didn't get it stuck on the quad. And then we did the brakes, and this was an expensive purchase here. These were tough to find. Getting these wheel cylinders, and then the shoes were easy enough. The cylinders were the big deal to rebuild in there. Got those rebuilt, so we do have those front hydraulic brakes working. Timing chain. The timing chain on the original motor and the parts machine, both of those timing chains were stretched about a half a link, and I couldn't tell you for sure if it was throwing things off, but the guide that the timing chain tensioner presses into was pretty well worn, and there was a pretty good sized dimple in the back of the guide as well, so it was just time. So replace the guides, replace the timing chain, and now everything's nice and tight in there. Of course, seat cover, an easy one there. Get a seat cover, use your air stapler, put that on, really cleans it up. The rattle paint, just went to the Home Depot, picked these up. The satin black is really just almost a spot-on match for the factory OEM paint on the Yamaha frames. And then the high temp enamel, use that after wire wheel, kind of a wire brush cleanup on the exhaust. Hit the exhaust with the high temp. It'll eventually burn off, but it does keep it looking much cleaner than just a rusted pipe. It protects it as well.
Spark plug, replaced the spark plug, made sure to get the right temperature range plug. The plug that was in there was a D7. The manual calls for a D8. Really towards the end of the build there, I did end up replacing the valves. They were gapped correctly, but as I was having some trouble getting to start and idle run fine, I decided to yank the head and go back in there. And the valves that were in there, they were starting to get pitted, and they had really worn pretty deep seats. So I did get some new valves, lap those in, get them in there. And then we have new sneakers. New tires are always great. That was a gift from my brother and my sister-in-law, so thank you guys. Really appreciate that. Really makes the quad look great. Great bite on those tires there. And again, we're at this tail end here, and I started having trouble with spark. I was getting one spark, only one spark, and I was really racking my brain on there. I had 2 harnesses I went through, couldn't find it, and ultimately what I ended up doing is swapping out the electrical system. I got a used harness for a 1990 Big Bear, swapped that in, and with that, the CDI, it's a different set of plugs, it grounds in a different place. The stator has different plugs as well. So I ended up with a kind of a quick surprise, $146 there to get it over the finish line. So there you have it, $682.58 in parts. And when you partner that together with the cost of the quads, there it is. There's the total in there for just under $1,700. A lot of surprises. Really a beat up quad. I think the most beat up quad I have ever taken on. Learned a lot of things. With a few, with less surprises, I bet I could have done this for $1,000, but this one just kept on giving.
Now, one thing I should mention as well is after that Excel sheet, I did end up going back, when I had the clutch side open, I did put in new clutch fibers while I was in there and filing, cleaning up the basket. So that was an additional $40 there, just to mention that. And that is it for now. There'll be a little bit more work here, but we're really coming around the tail end, unless I break something else or find another surprise. But this one has been an incredible learning journey. I've learned more on this one than I thought I would have. I came into this one thinking this was going to be really an electrical mess and kind of a quick tune-up, and this one has really taken me down the road of a lot of little worn out things that really kind of all added together for larger issues. Yeah, learned a lot. Yeah. So, okay, pause this one here for now.